Welcome to another craft tutorial. This is Linda from the Hamilton Public Library, and today we're going to make paper flowers. I have cut out several different shapes using scrap paper to create my templates. Depending on the shape you use for petals, you will create different types of flowers. You can experiment with the types of shapes and see what you create in the end. This flower here that we're going to make today was made using petals that are in a pointed shape. Here is another flower made with a more rounded edge on the template. So you can see that this looks more like a rose. And lastly, this flower was made by using the same template as the large pointed flower, but I've only used the two smallest petals to make a smaller flower. This can help you make flowers in various different sizes, depending on what you need. To create a template, I start by using scrap paper, not cardstock, just regular paper. I fold the piece of paper and I'm going to cut a shape out of it, kind of like when you were learning to cut hearts in school. This will ensure that your shape is symmetrical. So cut out a shape. You can also draw it out ahead of time if you don't want to cut it out freehand. So here I've made the first shape. This is the smallest petal. So we're going to fold it again in half and cut the same shape out but making it slightly larger. So you're going to use the first petal as your template for the next petals. So I'm cutting about 1/4 of an inch around this shape to make it slightly larger. This does take a bit of practice. Okay, I now have 2 petals, one slightly larger than the other. Continue until you have 5 petals of the same shape. Alternatively, if you want to find free templates online or purchase them, there are many options available. However, please make sure you check the copyright to ensure that you're not selling flowers using someone else's design unless they give permission to do so. If you create your own templates, you will not have to worry about what you do with the flowers. Now we're going to try making a flower. So here I have used my template to cut out the petals from my flower in the color that I have chosen. You will need to cut 6 petals out of each size of the petal template, and you will also need a circle for the base. I have used cardstock for this tutorial. You can use regular print paper, however, it will not stand up as firm as the cardstock will. To form the petals so that they're not lying flat, you're going to cut the bottom of the petal just slightly, 1 or 2 inches depending on the size of the petal, and then you're going to glue them together. This will give your petals dimension. Without it, your flower will just be completely flat. Once they're all cut, we're going to add a dot of glue at the bottom of the petals, and you will glue the 2 cut pieces together. You can see that once I've glued it, the petal now has dimension. So now you're going to glue all your petals this way. And you can see that they have a little bit of a curve to them. They're no longer lying flat. So just continue to glue all your petals until they are done. Remember that you'll have about 30 petals to glue if you're making a large flower. Also, a reminder that the glue does get pretty hot, so careful when you're trying to press the 2 pieces together. Once we're finished gluing the petals, we're going to curl them. This will give them another dimension that will make it look more like a flower. So you want to use something like a highlighter or a marker or something that has a smooth edge. If you use anything that's bumpy, like a pencil, it will create ridges along your flower. So you're going to slightly curl them backwards. So now you can see that it's got the slight curve at the bottom of the petal and it's curved back. So it's starting to already look like real petals. I've already cut out and glued the rest of my petals ahead of time. Now we're ready to create our flower. Now that we've made our petals, it's time to glue the flower together. Start with a circle. This will be your base for the flower. Glue the petals around the circle and evenly space out the petals. Add glue to the lower edge of the petal and glue about 1/2 inch from the edge of your circle. Before I start gluing, I place a piece of foam board below because your flowers will stick to it from the glue oozing out. And you don't want to ruin any surfaces in your home. The next petal will slightly overlap the first. If you find the glue is too hot when you're pressing down, use a pencil instead. Continue gluing the petals around the circle, overlapping slightly. As you glue the petals, you can see the flower is starting to form. And it looks a little floppy at first, but as you add more petals towards the center, it will become more stable. You can see here that it's sticking to my foam board, so periodically pick up your flower so that it doesn't permanently stick to the foam board. You can also see that I've only used 3 petals and only half the circle, so you can tell that I'm spacing them out evenly. So we're going to continue gluing the rest of the petals. And then we'll start with the next layer. Here's our last petal, and you'll see that you've got the shape of your flower started. The next layer will be glued slightly lower than the first and in between 2 petals. Continue gluing the petals slightly overlapping the previous petal, but trying to keep in between the outer layers of the petals. And again, we're just going to continue around the circle. And you may notice at this point that the flower is getting more stable, so it's easier to work with. So you can see why from these first few petals, how it's important to glue them between the petals of the first layer. If you glue them right in the center of the first layer, your flower will not look like a flower. So we've got a couple more petals. The next layer will again begin slightly lower than the layer we just finished. And again, we're going to go in between the petals of the previous layer. So the next layer will actually align with the first layer of petals. As you get closer to the center, you may also find that you might not have room for all 6 petals of the smaller size, and that's okay. If you end up only using 4 or 5 of the petals, it's fine, as long as it looks nice and full. So here we're starting the next layer. And we're again following the same pattern of gluing in between the petals of the previous layer. Okay, depending on how the flower looks at this point, sometimes I like to curl the petals in towards me, the smallest petals, instead of the other way around like I did with all the other petals. This gives the flower a bit more dimension towards the center. So I'm recurling the petals towards me, and as I start to glue the petals in the center, it forms the center of the flower a little nicer. And it looks like I may be able to fit all 6 petals in the center here. You can also make your flower with 2 different colors of cardstock or 3. I've made unicorn flowers when I've used a different color for each petal in the layer, and it looked really cute. So you could just use your imagination and do whatever you'd like. Next, we're going to create the center of the flower. Now that we've finished our flower, we're going to make a center for it. Here we have a very spiky, elaborate center. If you want something that is more delicate, I'll show you how to make a little rosette like I did for this flower. To create the center for our flower, I have folded a piece of cardstock in half and started cutting a fringe. Continue cutting all the way down to the end, but be careful that you don't cut right through to the edge of the cardstock. Once you're done cutting, you're going to fold it the other way. This is a bit tricky to do because it's all cut up, but you want to unfold it and refold it so it gets fluffed up, if that makes sense. Glue one side to help keep it in place, because as you're rolling, it can start shifting. Roll all the way to the end and make sure you keep it as straight as possible, adjusting as you go along. As you get to the end, you may need to glue a little bit more in place. This will help it from shifting while you're rolling. Once you've reached the end, add a little bit of glue and glue it to the base of the stem. Now we're going to fluff the center just by pulling the little strands apart. Be careful not to pull too hard as they will rip, but we just want to fluff it open so it's not all stuck in one place. Next, we're going to add a bunch of glue to the middle of the flower. You need to be a little generous as this will need a bit of glue to stay in place. Position the center and hold until the glue dries. Now to make the rosettes, start by cutting a circle in a piece of cardstock. Next, we're going to cut it into a spiral. Depending on how large your circle is, this will change the size of your rosettes. Cut the spiral around the circle all the way through and leave a small circle or tab at the end. This is where the rosette will sit in place. So you can see here that I've left a small circle at the end for the rosette. We're now going to snip the end off into a straight edge and we'll start rolling. This will be a bit more difficult than the other center as you have to keep the rosette tight and centered, adjusting your hold as you go along. So we're getting close to the end, so get ready to glue the rosette. Add a bit of glue to the circle at the end. Hold the rosette down to the tab and hold it in place. You may have to add a bit more glue. Hold the rosette tight in place for it to dry. The rosettes also look really sweet bunched together. You know, if you're decorating for a party and you have all these different types of flowers, you've now learned to really make 3 or 4 types of flowers today. So thanks again for watching how to make my paper flower tutorial. You can check out my other craft video on this channel, Paperback Daisies.